Mom, they tried to bury you but forgot you were the seed. The words hit me before I even registered who said them. I was standing just inside the ballroom doors, hidden partly behind an arch of white roses, watching 100 glittering faces turn in unison toward me like I'd walked into the wrong universe. Nobody smiled, nobody clapped, nobody said my name. The music had just faded out, one of those overly sentimental strings and piano tracks that weddings use to make emotion feel scripted. All around me were sequins, champagne flutes, and perfume thick as syrup. Somewhere close, someone laughed too loudly, but none of it felt real, not to me. Lila, the bride, my sister, stood under the chandelier with her arms wrapped tightly around Brandon, her groom. When she saw me, her eyes flickered like she was trying to compute a glitch in the system. Then she gave a little smile, the kind you give when you see something mildly embarrassing, like a stain on a white dress. I clutched the clutch in my hand, the same one I'd carried in Kabul on the last flight out. Inside it was the wedding invitation, mass-printed, no handwriting, no "Dear Avery," just a blank "Lila and Brandon, July 7th. I wasn't even sure I was supposed to be here, but I came anyway, and I shouldn't have. Or I thought I shouldn't have. Because just as I turned to leave, ready to disappear the same way I always had, his voice cut through the room, steady, low, commanding. "Ma'am, they tried to bury you but forgot you were the seed." And just like that, everyone stopped breathing. It's strange, the things you remember. Not the milestones, not the birthdays or graduations, but the quiet humiliations, the kind that seep in and stain everything else. Like the time I was 8, standing outside the locked front door in the rain because my mother didn't want the neighbours to see me tracking dirt through the house. Or the year Lila had her sweet 16 and I wasn't even allowed in the room while her friends were over. I watched through the kitchen window as they danced to pop music and posed for selfies while I stirred macaroni on the stove because Mom said, "You cook better than you socialise." That was always my role, the utility child, the one who stayed useful, invisible, quiet. Lila was the star. Golden curls, perfect smile, homecoming queen 3 years in a row. People called her Little Sunshine, and my mother soaked it in like a thirsty plant. I was the other one. Dark hair, dark moods, and a habit of staring too long at people like I was solving equations behind their faces. They thought something was wrong with me. "She's not right," Mom whispered once to a neighbour when she thought I couldn't hear. They sent me to therapy at 12 and again at 15, like I was a loose screw that just needed tightening. Eventually, I stopped fighting it. I folded into the role they wrote for me, quiet, offbeat, forgettable. But what they never knew, what they never cared to ask, was what I did with all that silence. At 17, I enlisted in the military, not because I was patriotic, but because it was the only doorway that opened when every other one was slammed shut. I left the next morning without saying goodbye. No one stopped me. No one even asked where I went. And that's when I learned what freedom actually felt like. Not applause, not praise, just the absence of judgment. Boot camp was the first place I learned how to breathe. Not because it was easy, God no, but because for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't know my name, my past, or my problems. They didn't care who I had or hadn't been. All that mattered was whether I showed up, whether I followed orders, whether I kept going, and I did, every day, even when my legs gave out, even when the drill sergeant screamed an inch from my face, even when I threw up from heat exhaustion and crawled back to my feet before the vomit dried on my boots. Pain I could handle, I was raised on it, but purpose, that was new. Somewhere between basic training and my first deployment, I disappeared. The old version of me, the broken, overlooked girl, just fell off like dead skin. In her place, I built something sharper, something unbreakable. I learned to fire, to read satellite maps, to decode silence and body language and hostile terrain. I climbed ranks without even noticing, mostly because I had stopped trying to prove anything. I just did what I had to do. I received my first commendation during a blackout mission in northern Syria. I saved 6 hostages, including a diplomat's daughter. My name was never mentioned in the press. That was part of the deal. But I got a private letter from someone in the Department of Defense, handwritten. I kept it. Still, I never told anyone back home, not even Lila. When she did message me, it was always performative. "Hope you're staying safe out there," followed by a photo of her latest brunch or a passive-aggressive dig. "I wish you'd come home and get a real job." I stopped replying eventually. The space between us had become too wide to bridge with emojis and small talk. Once I flew back to Georgia for 2 days on leave. I didn't tell them. I drove past the house. New flowers, fresh paint, same old porch swing creaking in the wind. I stayed in the car. I watched through the windshield as my parents laughed with Lila on the front lawn, toasting something in crystal glasses. They didn't know I was there. They never did. Somewhere along the way, I stopped hoping they'd see me. Recognition, after all, is just another form of dependence. I didn't want their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation to breathe. Still, a part of me, small and buried, wondered what would happen if they ever knew the truth. Not just about my deployments or medals, but the classified work, the strategic command I held, the rooms I'd sat in, the missions I'd led. I'd been stationed at black sites that didn't officially exist. I'd planned operations so delicate even my team didn't know the full picture. People think the military is just guns and orders, but at my level, it's chess, high stakes, global chess. And I had become a quiet grandmaster. By the time I turned 34, I was in charge of a covert unit operating across 3 continents. No photos, no public honours. But I was trusted, deeply, and that trust came with consequences. I couldn't post selfies. I couldn't tell my friends what I did. Hell, I couldn't even date without going through vetting. But I was good. Damn good. And yet, I couldn't tell my own mother. Couldn't say, "Hey, remember your broken daughter? She just briefed someone from the Pentagon today." That door had been welded shut a long time ago. I did, however, keep certain mementos, quiet trophies of my double life, a folded flag, a note from a child I'd carried to safety, a small carved box gifted to me by a tribal elder I once saved from execution. I kept them in a drawer, not for glory but for grounding, proof that I wasn't invisible, that I'd left footprints even if no one back home saw them. Then one day I received a manila envelope marked with a red insignia. Inside was a briefing. There was a wedding scheduled in Georgia, my hometown. A name on the guest list had flagged intelligence. I froze. It was Lila, and someone had run a background check. The envelope was pale ivory, thick as cardstock, and sealed with gold foil. No handwriting, no personal note, just an embossed script that read, "Lila and Brandon request the honour of your presence." There was no, "Dear Avery," no, "It's been a while," or "We'd love to see you," just the location, some sprawling vineyard in North Georgia, and the date, July 7th. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they'd sent it out of obligation. Maybe Lila didn't even know it was addressed to me. I held it like it might burn through my hands, unsure whether to laugh or rip it in half. I hadn't spoken to Lila in almost 2 years. The last time she texted me, it was a photo of her dog in a Halloween costume, followed by, "Hope you're still alive out there, lol." I never responded. So why now? Why invite the invisible sister? I set the card down on my kitchen counter, next to my encrypted laptop and a half-drunk mug of black coffee. The window behind me framed the grey skyline of Washington, D.C., a city that knew how to keep secrets. I liked it for that reason. It never asked me questions I wasn't ready to answer. I almost threw the invitation away. Honestly, I wanted to. But then something slid out from between the layers of paper, a photo. It was old, maybe 25 years or more, a candid snapshot. I was maybe 10, Lila around 4, both of us sitting on the back steps of our childhood home. I had my arm around her. She was laughing. I hadn't seen that picture in decades. I hadn't even known it existed. Someone had included it intentionally. Not just a printer or a wedding planner. Someone in that house wanted me there. But why? To reconcile? To apologize? Or to humiliate me all over again? For 2 days I left the invitation on the counter. I'd glance at it between briefings while tying my boots, pouring coffee, brushing my teeth, each time expecting the decision to feel clearer. It never did. The truth is, I was terrified. Not of bombs or combat zones, I'd faced worse. What scared me was the version of myself I'd have to become to walk into that vineyard. The unarmed version, the daughter, the sister, the ghost. I told myself it didn't matter, that they didn't deserve my presence, that I'd built a life so far beyond them they could never understand it. And all of that was true, but truth isn't always enough. Sometimes it's the weight of an unanswered question that keeps you from sleeping. Why now? Why the photo? Why the silence after all these years, only to be broken by a folded piece of cardstock? On the third night, I found myself standing in front of the box, the one where I kept the letters, the photos, the pieces of a life I never showed anyone. I hadn't opened it in years, not even after promotions or deployments or commendations. It was my reminder that history doesn't vanish just because you bury it. I lifted the lid. Inside, tucked between a folded flag and an old mission patch, was a note, written in pencil. The handwriting wobbly, half in cursive, half printed. It was from my grandmother. I hadn't seen her in nearly a decade. She'd passed away when I was overseas. But this note, it was dated just a few months before she died. You were never invisible to me. I saw what they couldn't. If they ever invite you back, don't go for them. Go for the girl you used to be. She deserves to be seen. I read it 3 times. The next morning, I booked a one-way ticket to Georgia. The airport in Georgia smelled the same, like fried food, cheap perfume, and industrial-grade carpet cleaner. My boots hit the linoleum with a thud that felt too loud for the quiet terminal, and for a moment I was 16 again, dragging a duffel bag behind me, leaving and daring anyone to stop me. No one ever had. This time I didn't wear a uniform, just a slate grey dress, fitted but modest, and a soft black coat. Civilian clothes still felt like camouflage to me, somewhere to hide when I wasn't allowed to be seen fully. Outside, the humidity wrapped around me like a damp hand. The Uber driver didn't speak much. He tapped at the steering wheel, glanced at me through the mirror a few times like he was trying to place my face. I kept my sunglasses on. I didn't feel like being recognised, even if I knew I wouldn't be. The venue was an actual vineyard, modern farmhouse style. White barn, oak trees lining a winding gravel driveway, little mason jars hanging from the branches like fireflies waiting to flicker. It was picture perfect in the kind of way that made me nauseous. At the entrance, a young man in a crisp black vest stepped forward with a clipboard. "Are you with catering or valet?" he asked without looking up. I stared at him. "I'm a guest." His eyes flicked up. Something in his posture shifted, like he didn't quite believe me, but didn't want to press it. "Oh, okay. Table assignments are inside." I stepped past him. Inside, the hum of string instruments buzzed over murmured conversations and champagne clinks. Everyone looked expensive. Flawless hair, tanned skin, polished shoes. And then I saw her, Lila. She was radiant, of course. Champagne-coloured dress, soft curls pinned just so, laughing like the whole world adored her. Maybe it did. She turned, saw me, and hesitated, a beat too long. Then that smile, tight, obligatory, the kind you give an old classmate at a funeral. "Avery," she said, moving toward me with arms half raised. "You came." Like she didn't expect me to, like she hoped I wouldn't. Lila hugged me the way you hug a stranger you don't want in your photos, quick, shallow, arms barely touching. She pulled back and gave me a once-over, like she was scanning for flaws. "You look different," she said, tilting her head. I smiled without meaning it. It's been a while. Yeah. She tucked a loose curl behind her ear and glanced over my shoulder. Anyway, it's open seating. Well, except for the head tables, obviously. Just find a spot. I stood still for a second too long, feeling the stares. Some curious, some disapproving. A few people pretended not to see me at all, which somehow felt worse. Lila had already turned to greet someone else, leaving me mid-sentence in a conversation that never really started. Inside the reception barn, everything was polished and symmetrical. Rows of florals, gleaming silverware, place cards written in swirling calligraphy. I walked the perimeter slowly, scanning for my name. It wasn't there. I went back, looked again. Maybe I'd missed it. But no. Every table, every name. No Avery. At last a woman in a headset appeared at my elbow, smiling too brightly. "Can I help you find your seat?" "I don't think I have one," I said. She flipped through her tablet, scrolling fast. Let me check with the coordinator. In the meantime, there's some overflow seating near the side doors. That table with the kids." I looked over. It was a folding table with 3 restless toddlers, a teenage boy scrolling his phone, and a half-empty plate of chicken nuggets. "Perfect," I said flatly. The woman didn't catch the sarcasm, or didn't care. I sat down beside a boy who didn't even glance up. His earbud buzzed faintly with some auto-tuned pop song. Across the room, I could see my parents, still regal in their practiced way. My mother in a slate blue gown, my father nodding politely to guests. Neither had noticed I'd arrived, or maybe they had, and decided not to show it. Dinner came and went without anyone acknowledging me. The servers skipped my table twice. When I finally caught someone's eye, he looked confused, as if unsure whether I was part of the event at all. I ended up with a lukewarm plate of steamed vegetables and a roll. No drink. From across the barn, I caught my mother's gaze. She didn't smile, just a tight nod, the kind politicians give strangers at parades. Then she turned back to her wine, laughing at something the maid of honour had said. At one point, a photographer came around to take candid table shots. He looked at me, hesitated, and then angled his camera away, toward a pair of matching toddlers beside me licking frosting off napkins. When the toasts began, the lights dimmed and soft piano music swelled. Lila and Brandon took their places beneath the floral arch. The best man spoke, then the maid of honour. Stories, inside jokes, tears, applause. My father stood and said a few words about watching his baby girl grow into a radiant woman. My mother followed, reading from a note card. "I always knew Lila would be our legacy," she said, voice catching like it was emotion. But I knew that hitch. It was performance. "She's everything I ever dreamed a daughter could be." There was no mention of me, not even a vague gesture toward family. Then, because the universe is cruel, the MC took the mic and said, "Now, if anyone else would like to share a few words, we welcome you." Lila's eyes met mine, a flicker, not fear, not affection, anticipation, like she was daring me. I stood slowly. The entire room turned, my hands were steady, my jaw locked tight. I didn't plan to speak. But silence had never saved me before. So I stepped toward the mic, and someone cut the lights. The lights snapped back on after only a few seconds, but by then the moment had ruptured. The mic I'd been walking toward now buzzed with feedback, and the MC, cheeks pink, laughed awkwardly. "Sorry folks, little glitch. Happens with these wireless systems." He turned, not to me, but to Lila. "Shall we move on to cake?" Lila gave a gracious, performative shrug and looped her arm through Brandon's. The guests clapped like they'd rehearsed it. I stood where I was for a moment longer, still and blinking, unsure if what just happened was technical or intentional. But then I caught it, my mother. In the far corner, standing by the gift table, calmly speaking into a small earpiece, the kind wedding coordinators wear. She turned slightly, just enough for me to see her expression. Not shock, satisfaction. They had planned it. The open mic, the spotlight, the short circuit. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a stage. And I was the punchline they never wanted to deliver, only to set up, just enough to remind me where I stood. I stepped back into the shadows near the side exit. No one followed. No one even looked twice. I grabbed a glass of champagne from an unattended tray and downed it too fast, the bubbles burning my throat. Somewhere behind me, laughter erupted over some childhood anecdote Lila's college roommate was telling. I knew they'd always have their stories. I had mine too. They just didn't like the chapters I lived through. I slipped out to the wraparound porch, needing air. Georgia summer at dusk was still hot, but quieter. Out here, the strings of fairy lights blinked gently above the railing. Crickets sang like nothing had changed. And then, a voice. Soft, male, controlled. "Avery?" I turned. Brandon stood a few feet away, still in his tuxedo, no smile. "I'm sorry," he said, eyes searching mine. "About what happened in there." I narrowed my gaze. "Which part?" He hesitated, then stepped closer. "I didn't know they'd do that. Your mother... She didn't want you to speak. She thought it would shift the attention." I exhaled a laugh, humorless. "And we wouldn't want the spotlight drifting from the Queen." He paused, studying me like someone deciphering a map they didn't realize was in a different language. Then quieter. "You were in Syria, right? 2019. Operation Black Timber." My spine straightened before I could stop it. He noticed. Brandon's voice dropped an octave. "I know who you are, Avery." For a few seconds I said nothing. Brandon's eyes didn't waver. He wasn't asking, he wasn't guessing. He knew. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," I said evenly, but it was too late. The change in my stance, the sudden shift in breath, I knew he'd seen it. "You saved 6 lives that night," he continued quietly. 2 diplomats, a translator, a child. The evac route had collapsed. You rerouted through a mountain pass with no aerial support. That wasn't just tactical instinct. That was leadership. He recited it like scripture, like it mattered more to him than the wedding we were standing in. My voice came out cooler than I felt. "That operation was classified." "I was there," he said. I blinked. He stepped forward, lifting the cuff of his sleeve just enough for me to see the thin white scar along his wrist. "My team was pinned in the north building, smoke inhalation, no comms. You cut us out, literally, through a collapsed tunnel. You carried one of my guys on your back 2 clicks. I never knew your name until months later." I stared at him, my mind working in spirals. And suddenly I remembered the dark stairwell, the weight of a soldier slumped over my shoulders, the faint wheeze of breath. I remembered telling someone, "Don't die on me, rookie." Brandon had been the rookie. "You shouldn't be telling me any of this," I said. He nodded. "I know, but I thought maybe someone should say thank you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because underneath my confusion, my walls were cracking. This wasn't pity. This wasn't some misplaced attempt to flatter me at his wedding. This was respect, earned, unsolicited, real. "You married my sister," I said, flatly, like I was reminding both of us what side of the line he stood on. His gaze didn't drop. "I know." Silence. Then, "I asked her about you once," he said. "She told me you were mentally unstable, that you moved around too much, couldn't hold a job." I swallowed hard. "She said you made stories up to get attention." "Of course she did." Brandon looked down at his feet. "But that night in Syria, you didn't ask for attention. You didn't wait for backup. You just came in and got us out." He looked up again. His voice was lower now, almost reverent. "I've never forgotten that, no matter what she says." I stepped back from Brandon, just enough to reset the space between us. "This isn't the time," I said quietly. "You're getting married. Or, technically, you already did." He looked down at his ring like he'd forgotten it was there. "I know how this looks," he said, "and I'm not crossing a line." I arched an eyebrow. He caught himself. "Okay, maybe I am, but not for the reason you think." I crossed my arms. "Then what reason is that?" Brandon hesitated, glanced toward the barn behind us. The lights inside pulsed like a living heartbeat, music, laughter, clinking glasses. Inside, a party. Out here, something else entirely. He lowered his voice. I think you were invited here for a reason, but not the one they told you. I didn't answer, but my pulse ticked up. He continued, Lila didn't want you here, that's obvious. But someone made sure that invitation reached you. Someone included that photo. The one of me holding Lila when we were kids. The one no one else should have had. I narrowed my eyes. You think it was you? He shook his head. No, but I know she found it in a box your grandmother left behind. She didn't want to keep it. She was going to throw it away. So why didn't she? Because I stopped her. Silence. He looked me dead in the eye. Avery, that picture meant something. To me. Not just because you saved my life, but because when I looked at it, I saw a different version of her. And of you. Something itched in the back of my mind, like a door I hadn't dared open. You knew who I was before you ever met her, I said slowly. Brandon didn't flinch. I did. A wave of heat rose in my chest. So you married her to get to me? He held up a hand. No. That's not what this is. Really? I snapped, because it's starting to sound a hell of a lot like obsession. His expression tightened. It's not obsession, Avery. It's admiration. It's respect. And maybe it became more than that, but I never planned this. Then what did you plan? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, to protect you. That stopped me. He took a breath. There's something coming tonight. Something she planned. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't. I stared at him. What kind of something? He looked over his shoulder, then back at me. She wants to ruin you. The music inside swelled again, now a fast, bright tempo. Lila's voice rose above it in laughter, loud and light, the kind that carries just a little too far, like she wanted to be sure I could hear. Brandon stepped back, as if he could feel my rising fury crackling between us. What exactly is she planning? I asked, my voice low and sharp. She got access to something, he said, some kind of personnel file. She's going to show it tonight, publicly. My heart dropped. What kind of file? I don't know all the details, he admitted. She said it would prove you were unstable, that you lied about your service record. It took everything in me not to let my hands shake. There is no fake record, I said flatly. Everything I've done has been sealed, not erased. I know, Brandon said, but they won't. He was right. These people, this room full of champagne-sipping small-town royalty, they didn't live in the world I came from. They didn't understand classified operations or blacked-out mission logs. To them, an empty file would look like a lie. And Lila, she'd make sure they saw it that way. I turned toward the barn. She's really going to do it? At her own wedding? Brandon nodded. She said it would be the final chapter, that she was tired of you haunting her shadow. I laughed once, bitter and low. I didn't even want to be part of her story. He touched my arm. I tried to stop it, I really did. I pulled away. Then you should have told me before the vows. There was nothing else to say. I walked back inside just in time to see Lila stepping up to the mic again, bouquet now replaced by a silver tablet. I want to share something special tonight, she said, beaming. Something personal. A piece of my life not everyone knows, but should. The lights dimmed. A screen flickered to life behind her. My stomach dropped. She'd done it. She was going to show them whatever she thought she found, whatever piece of my life she'd twisted into a weapon. Lila turned toward the screen, chin lifted. This, she said sweetly, is who my sister really is. The screen shifted. Images began to play. But not the ones she expected, not the ones I expected. They were satellite photos, grainy footage, tactical readouts, news reports, blurred names but unmistakable references. A hostage crisis, a female operative, a rescue, then a voiceover, a Pentagon press secretary. Undisclosed number of civilian lives saved, leader of the extraction identified internally as Colonel A.C., awarded the Silver Star. Identity remains classified for operational security. And then a photo. It was blurry. From a distance, but it was me, in full gear, leading a child by the hand toward a chopper. Gasps rippled through the room. The tablet slipped from Lila's hand, clattering on the floor. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The screen lingered on the photo, me, helmeted, faceless, but unmistakably there, guiding terrified civilians to a waiting helicopter. The roar of the rotors echoed faintly in the video's background. The room, by contrast, was silent. Then a voice cut through, low, calm, amplified by the mic Lila had dropped. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the woman who saved my son." Heads turned as a man stepped forward from one of the back tables, tall. Silver hair, black suit, understated but precise. I recognized him instantly. General Marcus Avedon, former Joint Chiefs, retired 4-star. A ghost in most circles, but unmistakable to anyone who'd ever briefed a mission above clearance level 12. Whispers erupted around the room like sparks from a wire. Lila stood frozen, bouquet trembling in her hand. "She didn't ask for recognition," Avedon said, voice steady. "She didn't request awards. She didn't even stay for debrief. She did her job, and in doing it, she saved 7 lives, including my son's." He paused, letting the weight settle. "And she's sitting right here, in your family, ignored, erased, until now." Every head turned toward me. I felt heat climb up my throat. Not shame, not pride, just exposure. That raw, unforgiving light you stand in when there's no way to step backward. Lila's voice cracked. How did you get this footage?" Avedon looked at her, unblinking. "You didn't think a flash drive labelled confidential, do not use, would stay safe in a wedding planner's email, did you?" The colour drained from her face. "You planned to use this to humiliate her," he said, "but in doing so, you handed it to someone who knows exactly what it means." He turned back to the audience, and now they know too. There was no applause, just breathless, stunned quiet. Lila staggered off the stage, her heels clicking sharp and uneven across the wooden floor. Brandon didn't follow. My mother rose slowly from her seat, eyes like glass locked on me, but for once she had no script, no lines to cover the silence. Brandon stepped beside me, but I didn't look at him. I couldn't. This wasn't vindication. This was something deeper. Exposure came at a cost. And somewhere inside, I knew I hadn't paid the full price yet. The guests had started to murmur again, quietly, nervously, like they weren't sure whether to applaud or pretend none of it happened. I stepped off the porch, brushing past the rows of tables without speaking. I needed air that wasn't perfumed with shame, applause, or someone else's crisis. Brandon followed. "Avery, wait." I turned to face him beneath a line of twinkling vineyard lights, their warm glow suddenly too soft for the weight in the air between us. "You knew this would happen," I said. "Didn't you?" He stopped a few feet away. "Not all of it. I didn't know General Avedon would show. That part. That wasn't me." "But the rest of it?" I asked. "The wedding, the invitation, the photo. Was it really just about Lila?" He hesitated, and that silence gave me the answer. "You found out who I was before you proposed to her," I said. He nodded once, slowly. "Yes. And you still married her. I didn't know how else to reach you." The honesty in his voice didn't soften the blow, it sharpened it. "You used her," I said, flat and cold. "You used my sister to get close to me." "She never loved me," he said quickly. "She was marrying an image, some war hero narrative she could show off. It was transactional from the beginning. I just didn't realize how deep her resentment for you went." "And you thought what?" I said. "That you'd swoop in, impress me, and I'd what? Fall for you?" "No," he said, voice cracking just slightly. "I didn't expect anything. I just wanted to protect you." I laughed, bitter and low. "You sound just like her, acting like I need saving." Brandon stepped closer. "Not saving, just acknowledgement." I looked up at him. "You don't get to speak for me." He didn't respond. He knew he'd gone too far. And still, part of me wanted to believe him, that maybe someone had admired me for who I was beneath the silence. But intentions, no matter how noble, don't erase deception, especially when they're wrapped in wedding rings and half-truths. "I'm done being someone else's mission," I said. Then I turned and walked away, back toward the darkened edge of the vineyard where the noise of the party faded and only the gravel crunched beneath my boots. The sounds of celebration had softened into a strange kind of hush. No more clinking glasses, no more curated laughter. Just the low hum of a DJ killing time with filler jazz and the occasional clatter of silverware being cleared too early. I didn't look back as I left the reception barn. Let them stare, let them whisper. I had been a ghost for so long that visibility felt like armour now. The gravel path wound between grapevines and garden lights, and for the first time all evening, I felt alone in a way that didn't ache, just quiet, peaceful. I was halfway to the parking area when I heard the voice. "Avery." I stopped. My mother stood near a flowering dogwood tree, backlit by the warm haze of string lights. She held a wine glass she hadn't touched. Her makeup was perfect, as always, every line of her face sculpted for appearances, but her eyes weren't sharp tonight. They were glassy, unfamiliar. "You knew," I said before she could open her mouth. "You knew what Lila was planning." She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked down at the wine like it might offer her a better excuse. "I didn't know it would go that far," she said finally. I nodded once. "That's the closest thing to regret I'll ever get from you, isn't it?" She flinched, but only slightly. "You never made things easy." "I wasn't supposed to," I said. "I wasn't born to play a role you approved of." We stood there for a long beat, the weight of years pressing down between us. Then she asked, "Why did you come?" I didn't answer right away, because for so long I hadn't known either, but then I looked up at her and said, "For me." A breath passed between us, and for the first time in my life my mother looked small, not cruel, not cold, just ordinary, like a woman who had spent her whole life pruning her family into something palatable, only to realize too late that the most vibrant thing she ever grew was the one she tried to cut down. I walked back to the car I'd rented, parked beneath a crooked oak at the edge of the vineyard. The night had settled into itself, thick and warm, cicadas humming like they'd been waiting for the humans to shut up and leave them in peace. I unlocked the door but didn't get in. Instead, I leaned against the hood, staring out across the fields. Rows of grapevines stood in perfect symmetry, like disciplined soldiers guarding a legacy that wasn't mine. A car pulled up behind me, quiet, cautious. I turned, instinct sharp. It was General Avedon. He stepped out alone, no fanfare, no aide-de-camp shadowing him. Just a folded envelope in his hand, and that same calm look that high-ranking officers wear when they've seen every version of human failure, and still show up anyway. "I figured you'd leave early," he said. "I figured you'd vanish the second the projector shut off." He smiled, faintly. "Old habit, but not tonight." He handed me the envelope. "I wasn't supposed to show that footage," he said. "But I figured if Lila wanted to weaponize your past, it was only fair someone weaponized the truth." I turned the envelope over. My name wasn't on it, just a wax seal, simple, unmarked. "She reached out to me before she passed," he said. I looked up. "My grandmother?" He nodded. "Said if things ever went too far, I'd know what to do." My hands suddenly felt too big for the envelope. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper. My grandmother's handwriting, loopy, sharp, old-fashioned. The ink slightly faded. "They only see what makes them comfortable. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to break patterns. Don't shrink to make them feel whole. Beneath that, in smaller writing, you have nothing left to prove. Go live. The words hit harder than any medal, any salute, any half-hearted apology from the crowd inside. I folded the note and tucked it into my coat pocket like armour. Avedon watched me quietly. You're not invisible anymore, I nodded. I never was. He gave me a 2-fingered tap to the temple, a silent salute, and stepped back into his car. No grand farewell, no orders, just acknowledgement. And that was enough. I didn't drive away, right away. I just sat there for a while, both hands on the wheel, the folded letter still warm in my coat pocket. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the itch to explain myself. Not to Lila, not to my mother, not even to the world I had served in silence. The people inside that vineyard would go home with stories about scandal, about secrets, about the woman who stood up without raising her voice and still made everyone uncomfortable. But I wasn't their story anymore, I was my own. The headlights cut through the gravel as I finally eased the car down the long, winding driveway. I passed the fairy-lit arch where Lila had said her vows hours earlier. A photographer stood near it now, snapping last-minute photos of half-empty chairs and untouched petals. He didn't look up, I didn't wave. I reached the highway just as the first stars broke through the haze. The city was a few hours north. The life I'd built, farther still. I had places to be. But for the first time, none of them felt urgent. At a red light just outside town, I rolled down the window. The summer air was heavy with honeysuckle and dust. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of the insects, the distant whir of a lawn sprinkler, the thud of a late freight train rolling through old tracks. Somewhere behind me, the girl I used to be, the one who made macaroni in silence, who watched her sister dance through life while she carried the weight of a war no one knew existed, finally stood up and walked away. And this time, I didn't turn around to see if anyone followed. I didn't need to. I wasn't coming back.